My name is Ashley. I'm 32 now, working quietly behind the scenes at a nonprofit. Back then, I still believed maybe this birthday would be different. But nothing changed. I was still just the other daughter. They handed the knife to Olivia, let her cut my cake while I watched. I didn't say a word, just waited until they all sat down. They didn't notice when I walked in. The room was already full, soft jazz playing in the background, clinking glasses and the smell of vanilla candles that Olivia always insisted on using for every birthday. Except this time it was mine. Or at least it was supposed to be. I stood near the entrance for a moment, holding a small box wrapped in brown paper. It wasn't a gift. Just something I brought back from a thrift shop downtown, a ceramic figurine Mom used to collect when I was little. I thought maybe it'd make her smile again. But from where I stood, she was already laughing, head tilted back, with Dad and Olivia holding a glass of white wine and a plate of lemon bars. No one looked up. I placed the box on the side table beside a half-empty vase of wilting tulips. There were name cards at the dining table, elegant ones with gold embossing. None had my name. I wasn't surprised, just tired. I made my way toward the back patio, where a few of Olivia's friends were chatting. I wasn't close with them, but I needed air, or maybe space. One of them glanced at me, then leaned closer to whisper something to the other. They giggled. I looked down at my shoes. They weren't fancy, just navy flats. Practical. Comfortable. Wrong, apparently. A voice called out behind me. "Ashley, you're here." It was Olivia. She wore a flowing emerald dress, one I recognized from an ad she posted online, a limited edition she once told Mom cost more than her rent. She walked over holding a glass of something pink, probably rosé. "Of course," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's my birthday." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Right. Mom said you might come." Might. Not invited. Just might. There was a pause. Then she turned, gesturing vaguely toward the kitchen. "There's cake in there if you want." Then she walked away, laughing at something one of her friends said. I didn't move. The sliding door behind me opened again. Dad stepped out, this time scanning the yard. His gaze passed over me like fog. He was looking for someone. Not me. The breeze picked up. I pulled my cardigan tighter and quietly stepped back inside. The laughter continued without me. Inside, they were already lighting the candles on Olivia's cake. Apparently, she'd made her birthday just a joint celebration, a phrase Mom loved. It meant I didn't get a separate cake, or card, or moment. When they sang, they only said her name. "Happy birthday, dear Olivia." My name didn't make the song. I didn't sing. I just watched. Then quietly walked to the kitchen, poured myself some water, and leaned on the counter. From there I heard it. Mom's voice, loud enough to cut through the chorus of conversation. "She's just a leftover. You know, always tagging along. A leftover." They laughed. I didn't move. I stared at the glass in my hand. The condensation made my fingers wet, but I didn't wipe it off. They didn't know I heard. But I did. Every word. And I didn't cry. I just stood there, letting it sink in. Not the insult I'd heard worse, but the ease of it. How natural it sounded coming from my mother's mouth. As if I wasn't in the room. As if I'd never been. I stayed in the kitchen longer than I needed to. I watched the flicker of the candles from across the room, casting golden glows on Olivia's flawless face as she posed for pictures. Dad was filming a video while Mom adjusted the hem of Olivia's dress. Someone handed her a second gift. Another friend cheered, "You deserve it, girl." It was like watching a show I wasn't cast in. I wasn't even in the audience, more like the staff cleaning up after. I took out a small slice of cake from the fridge. It wasn't hers. I had bought it for myself the day before. A modest single-layer chocolate cake with no writing on it. I didn't expect it to be served, just wanted something that said you were born today and it matters. I placed a single candle on top and pulled out a match from the junk drawer. As I lit the flame, the sound of laughter roared again from the living room. That's when Olivia walked in. She looked at the cake. Just one small plate, one tiny candle, one lone celebration. Her eyes trailed down and she smirked. Doing a little side ceremony, I smiled. Just thought I'd light it before heading home." "Suit yourself," she said, reaching into the fridge for a bottle of sparkling water. She paused. "You know Mom says you're always doing this, making things about yourself when it's not your moment." I didn't respond. I just blew out the candle. There wasn't a wish, just breath. Olivia left the room and I picked up the plate, walked to the small sunroom and sat by myself. From there, I could hear the piano music Mom had queued up on the playlist. It was one of the songs I used to play when I was younger, back when I still believed playing it softly during dinner would bring peace. I ran my finger along the edge of the plate, then took a bite. It tasted like every birthday I had remembered since I was 15, quiet, slightly bitter and over before it began. A group photo was being taken in the living room. Mom's voice chimed, "Come on, Olivia, you stand here next to Dad." Perfect. Someone asked, "Where's Ashley?" No one answered. I wiped my hands, walked out, and stood just outside the photo frame. No one asked me to join in. No one moved aside. I watched the flash go off. After that, Mom turned to me and said, "Oh, Ashley, you can take the next photo if you'd like." "You're good with that phone, right?" I looked at her, then at Dad, then at Olivia, and I nodded. I held up the phone, took a few steps back to get the angle right, and captured them their perfect image. Click. Done. I handed the phone back and said, "It's all yours." And they didn't even look at the photo. They were already moving on, talking about Olivia's new apartment, her job promotion, the boutique launch she had scheduled for next month. That's when it hit me I wasn't part of the future they talked about. I was a footnote, background noise, a leftover. I slipped outside after that. The evening air was crisp, brushing gently against my face like an unspoken truth. I stood on the small porch, arms crossed, watching as distant headlights moved down the quiet street. The noise from inside dulled into a low murmur behind the glass door. In that moment, I didn't feel angry. I felt still, a kind of stillness that settles when you finally stop trying to explain yourself. I pulled out my phone and looked at the time. 9:42 p.m. My birthday was nearly over and no one had even said the words. Not properly. Earlier that day, Mom had passed me in the hallway and said, "Oh, we'll do something soon for yours too." But her tone made it clear she didn't mean it. She just needed to say something. And Dad, he hadn't even looked me in the eye all night, too busy arranging the balloons for Olivia. 29, I whispered to myself. "Happy birthday, Ashley." I walked to my car parked down the street. They had asked me to leave the driveway clear for guests. As I passed the side window, I glanced in. Olivia was holding court again, telling a story. Everyone laughed, heads thrown back, glasses raised. Then I saw it, my candle, still on the kitchen counter. The wax melted into a strange shape, the match burned down next to it. No one had touched it. No one had even moved it. I got in the car, shut the door gently, and sat for a second with my hands on the wheel. My fingers were trembling, but not from sadness. It was something else, like the quiet before something shifts. I turned the key, and the engine hummed to life. As I pulled away, the porch lights faded behind me. No one waved goodbye, but I didn't need them to. That night before I went to bed, I lit the candle again. Alone in my apartment, no decorations, no guests, just me. And I smiled. Because next year, I wouldn't be there. I was done asking for a seat at their table. I was building my own. A few weeks after that birthday, I stopped checking in. No more weekly texts, no calls. I didn't make a scene, I just stopped reaching out. And they didn't seem to notice. Life at my nonprofit picked up pace. We'd just received a small grant, and I started managing a new program for single mothers. My hours stretched long, but the work grounded me. It gave me purpose, and most days it was enough. Until Olivia showed up at the office one Thursday afternoon. I spotted her through the frosted glass of our front door, heels too high for the sidewalk, sunglasses, oversized a purse that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Hey, Ash," she sang as she stepped inside, pulling her shades off. "You work here?" I stood blinking. "Yeah, I run this program." She looked around the modest space like it was a curious exhibit. "Wow. So like, you're helping moms and stuff?" I nodded, already bracing. She smiled like she was doing me a favor, That's cute. She didn't mean harm, at least not in the way that cuts quick. No, Olivia's harm was slower. She mastered the art of layering praise with quiet dismissal. Anyway, she continued flipping her hair. Mom and Dad wanted me to drop this off. She pulled an envelope from her purse and placed it on my desk, like it was a contract. Family brunch this Sunday. Early birthday for Dad. Come if you can. And just like that, she was gone. I didn't open the envelope for hours. When I did, it was a printed invitation. RSVP requested dress code semi-formal brunch at a country club downtown. I wasn't surprised, but still something ached. Not because I didn't want to go, but because I knew exactly what kind of event it would be. By Sunday, I had made my decision. I wore a navy blue blouse, simple slacks, and a silver pendant Mom had given me years ago before things got complicated. The club was just as I expected. White tablecloths, quiet, classical music, and guests who spoke like they were always on the edge of a golf swing. I saw them at a long table near the window. Mom waved a polite smile. Dad raised his hand in acknowledgement. Olivia stood to hug me, but it was the kind of hug you give a coworker at a retirement party, not your sister. You made it, she said, brushing imaginary lint off my shoulder. I did. The seat at the end of the table was mine. I noticed there were name cards. Everyone else had theirs centered in front of their plates. Mine was handwritten on a sticky note. No one else seemed to notice. During the meal, conversation floated past me. Olivia talked about a real estate deal. Mom laughed too hard at something Dad whispered. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap, nodding when needed. When the waiter brought coffee, Olivia's tone shifted. So Ashley, she began tapping her spoon against her saucer, still working with those moms. The table quieted slightly. I smiled. Yes. We're launching a new mentorship program next month. She blinked, then laughed. That's adorable. You've always had such a big heart. Mom chimed in. It's good that she's found something meaningful. Not everyone needs to chase big careers. I stared at her for a moment. There was no malice in her tone, just that familiar weight of low expectations. That's when Dad, without looking up from his coffee, muttered, "As long as she's not relying on us." The words settled like dust on the tablecloth. No one responded. I looked at my plate. My fork hadn't moved. They kept talking about travel stocks, Olivia's plans to buy a vacation home. I didn't try to contribute. I wasn't angry. But something inside me shifted. After that brunch, I didn't speak to them for a while. It wasn't a decision made in anger. It was a kind of quiet choice, a preservation of dignity. At work, we were ramping up for our annual fundraiser, and I buried myself in it. The women in the program kept me grounded, their courage, their resilience. One of them, Lena, brought her toddler every Tuesday. He liked to hide under my desk and hand me imaginary cookies. That small, joyful chaos felt more like family than the brunch ever did. Then came the text. From Olivia. Midweek. No greeting. Mom wants to know if you're coming to the family dinner Saturday. Grandma's memorial. I sat with it for a moment. Grandma had passed a year ago that week. No one had reached out to me during the funeral planning. I found out through a neighbor. Didn't know there was one, I replied. A few seconds later, well, there is. 6 p.m. At the house. I didn't respond. That Saturday, I stood across the street from our childhood home for a long while before walking in. The porch light was on, even though it was still daylight. That old creak of the door greeted me like it always had. Inside, the house smelled of polished wood and baked ham. Laughter trickled from the dining room. I stepped in. Olivia saw me first. Her brows lifted, surprised, but not unpleasantly. "Look who showed up," she said. "Didn't think you'd make it." "I wasn't invited." "Technically, you were." She shrugged, sipping wine. The table was full. I stood unsure where to go until Mom motioned vaguely to a folding chair at the corner of the room, half tucked like it had been an afterthought. During dinner, everyone shared memories of Grandma. "She always told me I'd run the world one day," Olivia said, laughing. Guess she was right. There was a pause. Then Mom looked my way. "Ashley, you want to say something?" I hesitated. Then shook my head. "I'm good. She always said you were sensitive," Dad added, Not unkindly, but with that tone, the one that made you feel small and ungrateful for wanting more. As dessert was brought out, Olivia leaned across the table. "You know you still have time to turn things around." I raised an eyebrow. I mean, she smiled sweetly. "There's always a place for you in the family business. Maybe if you dressed a little more polished?" There it was again, the helping hand with thorns. I didn't answer. After dinner, as everyone moved into the living room, I stepped into the kitchen needing space. That's when I saw the letter on the counter. My name on the envelope. My full name. It wasn't sealed. I don't know what possessed me, but I opened it. It was from Grandma, dated 2 months before she passed. "Ashley," it read, "I know you won't be told much. That's just how this family is. But I see you. I've always seen you. You do good. Quietly, yes, but the kind that changes things. I hope someday they'll know what they lost when they dismissed you." I folded the letter and slipped it into my bag. I didn't say goodbye when I left. I didn't need to. The air outside was cooler than I remembered. Crisp. Clear. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The following weeks passed in a kind of quiet blur. I went to work, did my job, and kept my head down. But Grandma's letter stayed with me. I read it more times than I'd like to admit, each word digging deeper into the hollow space I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. At the shelter, we were finalizing the annual gala plans. This was our biggest event of the year, held in the city's restored courthouse building, with press donors and past clients attending. For the first time, I'd been asked to open the evening with a short speech. It was unexpected. I was usually the one organizing behind the scenes, never standing in front of the microphone. When Mrs. Daniels told me, I blinked. "Why me? Because you've earned it," she said plainly. "People respect what you've built here." Her words settled over me like warm sunlight. No theatrics, just truth. The day of the gala, I chose a simple navy dress and pulled my hair back. I wasn't trying to impress anyone, I just wanted to show up whole. The hall buzzed with voices and clinking glasses. Names I recognized from donor lists mingled with women from the shelter, all dressed up and radiant in their own way. When Mrs. Daniels stepped up to the podium and introduced me as the quiet force behind the transformation of countless lives, I felt the room pause. I walked up, heart-pounding palms slightly damp. But my voice didn't shake. I'm not usually the one up here. I began smiling gently. I tend to work from the side, behind the scenes, but lately I've come to realize that sometimes being seen matters too. I shared a few short stories about Lena's toddler crawling into group meetings, about a woman who taught herself to read again at age 50. I didn't mention my family. I didn't need to. The applause was warm, earnest. After the speech, I stepped aside and tried to disappear into the crowd again. That's when I saw them. Olivia and Mom, standing near the back just inside the hall. They hadn't said they were coming. They weren't smiling. They weren't clapping. They were watching. I don't know how long they'd been there or what brought them. Maybe someone had forwarded the gala invite. Maybe curiosity got the better of them. But the way Mom's fingers fidgeted with her necklace, something she only did when she was uncomfortable, and the way Olivia's eyes followed me, quiet for once, told me everything. They had seen. I didn't wave. I didn't walk over. I simply turned and continued greeting others. Women who had been ignored by their own families. Donors who had chosen to support a place most people overlooked. Volunteers who showed up with casseroles and coats in winter. They were my people. That night, as the event drew to a close, Mrs. Daniels squeezed my hand and leaned in. "They were here," she murmured, nodding toward the doors. "I know. They didn't speak to anyone." I figured. She gave a small smile. "You didn't need them to anyway." "No," I agreed quietly. I didn't. When I got home that night, I lit a single candle in the kitchen. Not because it was my birthday, it wasn't, but because it felt like something had quietly shifted. Not loudly, not with fireworks. Just shifted. And that was enough. My birthday fell on a Saturday that year. I didn't plan anything. No balloons, no dinner reservations, no group texts asking people to save the date. Just a quiet morning with a cup of coffee, some banana pancakes, and the hum of a soft jazz playlist. I hadn't expected anything from my family, not anymore. The last few years had taught me to lower expectations until they nearly disappeared. But around 11 a.m., I got a call from Aunt Lillian. Her voice, usually brisk and amused, carried a different tone that morning. "Honey," she said, "I just heard from your mother. There's a brunch at the house for your birthday. Starts at noon." I assumed you knew. My grip on the mug tightened. No, I hadn't known. There had been no message, no invite. Not even a vague "we'll be around if you want to stop by." Still, I said, "Thanks for letting me know." I didn't rush. I didn't dress up. I slipped on a soft sweater and jeans, grabbed the cake I'd baked the night before, chocolate with espresso glaze, my favorite, and drove to the house I used to call home. When I arrived, the driveway was already full. Cars lined the curb. Laughter drifted from the backyard. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon rolls and sausage. Streamers hung in shades of soft gold and cream. Olivia stood near the kitchen island, looking radiant as always. She wore a pale blue dress, hair curled to perfection, her hand resting on the shoulder of her fiancé. Everyone turned when I walked in, but no one moved toward me. Mom was the first to speak. "Oh, Ashley, you made it." Her voice was flat, caught between surprise and inconvenience. "I heard there was a brunch," I said, simply holding up the cake. Olivia gave me a smile, too wide, too quick. "We weren't sure you'd come." I looked around. The decorations, the setup, everything felt curated, coordinated, like a brunch for someone important, someone expected. And then I saw it, a small placard on the table that read, "Happy Joint Celebration, Olivia and Ashley." My name, second? Dad came out from the patio and chuckled when he saw me. "There she is, the guest of honor, well, one of them." Laughter followed. I smiled faintly, then walked to the dining table and placed the cake down without a word. Most of the attention naturally stayed on Olivia. She had just gotten promoted. She had a wedding coming up. Her stories filled the air with the kind of ease that made people lean in. I sat near the end of the table, listening quietly, taking in the scene like I was watching a play from behind the curtain. At one point, someone I don't even remember who said loudly, "Olivia's always been the golden child. Poor Ashley, the leftover daughter." The words weren't sharp. They were said in jest, followed by a chorus of chuckles. But no one stopped them. No one said, "Hey, that's not funny," not even Mom. I let the silence settle. Then slowly, I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and opened a drawer. There it was, a single birthday candle. I returned to the table, lit the candle, and placed it gently into the center of my cake. No one spoke. I met Olivia's eyes, then Dad's, then Mom's. "I'll go ahead and make my wish," I said softly. And I smiled. I didn't sing. I didn't make a joke. I didn't perform the way they'd grown used to me performing, always the one to soften tension, to smile first, to make others comfortable even when I wasn't. I just closed my eyes. In that brief moment, the world quieted. I could feel the flame's warmth just inches from my face, the scent of chocolate and espresso rising with the candle's tiny flicker. I breathed in, and then blew it out. The room stayed silent. No applause, no make-a-wish. Just the soft hiss of smoke curling into the air. When I looked up again, something had shifted. Olivia's smile had dimmed. Her fiancé gave her a look curious, like he'd missed a cue. Mom was frozen, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. Dad cleared his throat, attempting to redirect with a weak chuckle. "So he said, 'Who wants cake?'" I reached for the knife before anyone else could. Cut the cake cleanly. One slice, then another. I plated a piece and handed it to Aunt Lillian, who had arrived just in time to witness the aftermath. "You always made the best cakes," she whispered to me, her hand brushing mine. I didn't respond, but I saw her eyes. They weren't pitiful, they were knowing. As the others began serving themselves, the energy in the room grew tense. People tried to pretend nothing had happened. Conversations resumed, but quieter now, measured. I stepped outside for a breath. The backyard was filled with hydrangeas in full bloom. The sun hung just past noon, casting long shadows across the patio. I stood by the edge of the garden, letting the breeze lift my hair. Ashley. It was Olivia. She walked toward me slowly, barefoot, holding a glass of something pink and bubbly. Probably her custom rosé spritzer Mom always made just for her. I didn't mean anything by what they said she offered. I looked at her. You didn't stop it either. She blinked, caught off guard. It was just a joke. I know, I said. Most truths are. She stared at me for a beat. You've changed. I tilted my head. No, you just finally noticed. She opened her mouth to say something else, but Mrs. Daniels called from the gate. I hadn't even seen her arrive. Tall, sharp-eyed, impeccably dressed Mrs. Daniels had always carried the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to announce her presence. She walked toward me with a smile and held out a small white envelope. I thought you'd want to open this in front of your family, she said. It's official. My hand shook slightly as I took it. Olivia hovered behind me, uncertain. I peeled the flap open. Inside was a formal letter stamped with the insignia of the National Foundation for Civic Innovation. My proposal for the Youth Community Mentorship Program approved, fully funded, launch date confirmed, and at the bottom in bold, recipient Ashley Monroe, founder and executive director. For a moment, I didn't say anything. Then I turned around and walked back inside, envelope in hand. Mom and Dad looked up as I entered. So did half the room. Conversations stalled again. I have something to share? I said, voice calm. I didn't raise it. I didn't project. I simply stood in the center of that perfectly arranged brunch and held the letter out. They read the header first, then the signature, then the bold line at the bottom. The shift was immediate. Mom's face went pale. Dad lowered his glass slowly. Olivia stepped just inside the door but didn't speak. They approved the program, I said. I'll be leading it starting this fall. Someone gasped quietly. A cousin whispered, That's huge. Isn't that national? I nodded, and then I sat down at the center of the table. Not the edge. No one objected. They just made room. I could feel every eye on me as I lifted my fork and took a small bite of cake. It was a simple gesture, mundane even, but in that moment it held weight. The same people who had laughed earlier were now watching in silence, unsure of what to say. The roles had reversed without fanfare. No big speech, no confrontation, just a letter and a quiet seat at the center of the table. Olivia took the empty chair beside me. She didn't say a word. Her presence was quieter than I'd ever known it to be. She didn't demand attention. She didn't shine. She simply sat, shoulders drawn in gaze lowered. For once, she wasn't the center. Across the table, my father cleared his throat. Ashley, we didn't know you'd been working on something like this. I met his eyes steady. I didn't think you'd be interested. He flinched a little. Not because I was cruel, but because the truth was undeniable. It settled between us like a stone dropped into still water, quiet but rippling outward. Mom reached for her glass hand, trembling slightly. Why didn't you tell us I applied over a year ago, I said. It came up at last year's brunch, remember? But we got sidetracked with Olivia's engagement announcement. A pause. No one responded. Because they did remember. I saw it in their eyes, the memory of me trying to share something, and the moment being swept away by the clink of champagne glasses and the squeal of wedding plans. I just figured I added some things are better kept private, until they're undeniable. Silence again, but not cold, not cruel, just realization. Aunt Lillian gave a soft laugh and raised her glass. To Ashley, she said, for building something that matters. One by one, others followed. Cousins, uncles, even the neighbors who had wandered in with gifts. Their toasts weren't grand, just quiet nods of acknowledgement. But that was enough. I didn't need a standing ovation. I didn't want revenge. All I'd wanted for the longest time was to be seen beyond the shadows of comparison. And now, for the first time, I felt like they saw me. After dessert, guests started to trickle out. Olivia stayed behind, lingering near the kitchen, idly helping Aunt Lillian with dishes. Mom sat by the window, staring out at the garden, lost in thought. Dad busied himself with folding chairs, unusually quiet. Mrs. Daniels caught my arm before leaving. You handled that with grace, she said. More than most would. I smiled. I've had a lot of practice. She nodded. That's why you're ready for what's next." Her words weren't just about the foundation. I stood by the doorway as the last of the guests left. The house felt still again, like it did every year after a birthday, except this time something was different. The silence wasn't heavy. It was clean, like fresh air after a storm. Olivia approached me, a small plate in hand. "There's one slice left," she said. "I figured you should have it." I took it with a small smile. "Thanks." She hesitated. "That program of yours, do you think it could use a volunteer coordinator?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at her, really looked, and saw that for once she wasn't offering help as a favor or a show. She was reaching. Maybe awkwardly, maybe late, but sincerely. "I'll send you the application," I said. Her smile faltered, but she nodded. "Fair." The clock ticked softly in the background. The candles had burned down. The table was clear. And as I turned off the lights and made my way upstairs, the phrase "leftover daughter" echoed somewhere far behind me, faint now and irrelevant. Because in that house, in that moment, there was no more pretending. No more need to explain or prove. They had seen me, and they hadn't looked away. Some moments don't need applause to echo. Sometimes the quietest shift leaves the deepest mark, and when the room finally goes still, that's when you realize who truly saw you.